The mountain doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care that you're 19 years old with $47 and a sleeping bag that costs $6 from a Goodwill bin. It doesn't care that every person who looked at the papers told you to sign. It doesn't care that the road up here nearly swallowed your truck whole, or that the door hadn't opened for 3 seasons, or that your breath shows in the air inside in September, which tells you everything about what winter is going to do to this place. Pull back far enough and it's just a hollow in the eastern slope of a Tennessee mountain. Timber, creek, a small clearing where the afternoon light comes through. Move closer and there's a cabin. Roof holding, barely. Closer still, a girl with her shoulder against a swollen door. She pushes, the door gives, and somewhere inside these walls, something has been waiting a very long time for exactly this moment. The door didn't open. She pushed it once, nothing. Pushed it again harder this time, and it gave a little, just enough to let in a blade of cold air and the smell of something closed up for a long time. She stepped back, looked at it, looked at the peeling paint on the frame and the dark stain running down from the roof line and the way the wood had swollen into itself like it had decided a long time ago that nobody was coming back. She put her shoulder into it, really put her shoulder into it. And the door came open all at once, not gracefully, not the way doors open in movies, but with a grunt and a stumble and her boots sliding on the plank floor inside, arms out for balance, heart going faster than she wanted to admit. She straightened up, stood still, let her eyes adjust. Her breath showed in the air, inside the cabin, in September, which told her something about the insulation before she looked at a single wall. She was 19 years old. She had $47 in her coat pocket. She had a sleeping bag she'd bought at a Goodwill in Johnson City for $6 a Stanley thermos, with the last of that morning's coffee, her grandfather's buck knife on her belt, and a canvas pack with maybe 9 days of food in it if she was careful. That was everything. That was the full list. Her name was Ruelle Vance, and everybody who knew anything about this property had told her to sign the paper and walk away. She didn't sign. The cabin sat at roughly 4,200 feet on the eastern slope of Rand Mountain, Carter County, Tennessee, 11 miles by gravel road from the nearest town of any size, 4 miles from the closest house with a year-round occupant. The hollow it occupied had a name on the county survey map, Cutter's Hollow, though she'd never heard anyone say it out loud. A creek ran maybe 60 yards downhill to the south, narrow enough to step across in August, loud enough in March that you couldn't hear yourself think. 9 acres total, mostly steep, mostly second-growth timber, a small clearing around the cabin where the afternoon light came through. The attorney in Elizabethton had called it a liability, the word he used specifically on a Tuesday morning in a beige office that smelled like printer toner and old coffee was burden. He said it twice. He slid a release form across the desk and explained slowly the way people explain things when they've already made up their minds about what you're going to do, that the county would take it for back taxes, that it was the clean option, the sensible option. He had a very sensible tie. Ruelle looked at the form for a long time. Then she looked at the man. Then she folded her hands on the desk and said she needed to see the property first. He sighed, not rudely, just the particular kind of sigh that means I've already done all the math here and you're about to waste both our time. He gave her the address and the survey map and a key that didn't work. She found that out later and sent her on her way. She drove the gravel road twice before getting out and walking the last half mile. The truck, a 1997 Ford Ranger with a cracked passenger window patched with packing tape, couldn't make the last switchback without the front end threatening to find the ditch. She walked, carried the canvas pack and the thermos and the sleeping bag rolled under one arm. The door had swollen shut, and she had pushed it open anyway. She stood in the middle of the room and turned slowly. One room, 18 by 22 feet, give or take. Stone chimney on the north end, 2 windows facing east, a door on the south wall that opened into nothing, just a 2-foot drop to bare ground where something had once been attached and then wasn't anymore. A rope caught in the corner, a small wood stove near the fireplace, a shelf on the east wall with a single book on it. The floor was the first problem. She walked the perimeter, slowly drifting her weight forward with each step, the way you'd test ice heel first, then slowly full foot, listening. About a third of the boards gave, not catastrophically. Nothing collapsed, but the give was wrong. Soft. The kind of soft that meant moisture had been working at this for years from inside the walls. She tested a board with her boot, and her foot went through the surface layer, just the top inch of pine. The subfloor underneath held, but the hole it left was the size of a fist, and the wood around it came away in pieces, dark and fibrous, the color of old tobacco. She pulled her boot out, looked at the hole, put her boot back on. One problem at a time. The ceiling was the second problem. 2 stains in the northeast corner, each with its own ring pattern, old watermarks layered over older ones, each ring a different season, a different failure in the same spot on the roof. She counted 4 separate rings in the larger stain. 4 years, maybe more, of water coming through the same place. The cold was 41 degrees by the small dial thermometer she'd hung from the door lintel, her grandfather's thermometer, one of maybe 5 things of his she had with her. September 14th, 7 weeks, maybe 8 before the first hard freeze at this elevation. 4 weeks before nights started dropping below freezing consistently. She had been thinking in months. Standing in this room, looking at the ceiling stains, feeling the cold that had no business being this cold in September, she started thinking in weeks. Near the chimney on the east-facing side of the stone, someone had stacked 6 or 7 lengths of split wood, dry, old enough that the bark had crumbled away from most of it. She picked up a piece and cracked it across her knee. The inside was still pale, still tight-grained, firm. Whoever had stacked it had done it right off the ground against the stone, away from the wall, where moisture ran down in winter. That wasn't an accident. That was someone who knew what they were doing. She held the piece of wood for a moment, set it back on the stack carefully, the way you set something down when you've just realized it might belong to someone. The chimney was first. The chimney was always first. If it didn't draw nothing else in, the cabin mattered. Not the roof, not the floor, not the cold that was coming and was already here. She found a length of baling wire on the window ledge, still workable, bent a hook into one end and fed it up through the firebox as far as her arm would reach. It caught something. Not a bird's nest, she'd half expected that. A loose brick, dropped and wedged itself sideways in the flue, probably from freeze-thaw cycling, working at the mortar for years. She worked the wire for 10 minutes. The brick shifted more, then fell into the firebox with a sound like a small avalanche. Mortar dust came with it, and then a column of cold air moved down from above. The flue was open. She stood there with dust in her hair and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Relief, just plain uncomplicated relief. She built a small fire, 3 of the old dry splits, nothing ambitious, just enough to test the draw. The smoke lifted and pulled and disappeared up the throat of the chimney the way it was supposed to. No backdraft, no staining. The draft was clean. She watched it for a full minute. Then she went outside to check the chimney cap. The cap was a flat stone, roughly set, and one edge had shifted enough to let weather in, but not enough to block the flue entirely. That was the loose brick. Freeze and thaw, year after year, easy enough to repoint with the right mortar. She had 3 bags of Portland cement in the bed of the truck. Her grandfather's note, tucked into the survey map, written in his small, tight handwriting, had said to bring it, had underlined it twice. She hadn't understood why until right now. She walked the foundation next, crouching at the base logs, pressing her palm flat against the wood. 6 of them were solid, two on the northeast corner had softness in the outer inch, not rot through and through, but the beginning of it. Worth watching, worth shoring up before the snow loaded the roof above them. The roof itself she couldn't fully assess from the ground, but she'd seen the stains on the interior ceiling, and she knew what layered stains meant. She would need to get up there before the end of the week. She had tarp roofing nails and the claw hammer she kept behind the truck seat. She had maybe 2 weeks before the first freeze if the weather held. She went back inside, fed the fire another piece of that old dry wood, and started making a list in her head. The list had a shape before she even found something to write it on. Roof first, foundation second, water third. The creek Casper Fork named on the county survey map she'd found folded in the glove box. She didn't know yet whether it ran clean, didn't know if there was an old mine seep upstream fouling it, until she knew she'd melt snow in the cast iron pot and let it settle. Fourth wood. The supply inside was finite. Someone had seasoned that pile years ago, and it wouldn't last the winter. She would need to fell and split before the hard cold came, not during it. She found a stub of pencil in the breast pocket of her grandfather's canvas coat, the one she'd taken from his house the week after the funeral without asking, because no one else was going to want it, and wrote the list on the inside cover of the water-stained field guide she found on the shelf. Appalachian Edible Plants, published 1971. Somebody had lived here and cared enough about living here to own a book like that. She wrote in the margin, roof tarp nails this week, northeast corner logs assess, Casper Fork test or find spring, wood fell and split before November. Then she stopped, opened the book to the first page, looked at it for a moment, put it back on the shelf. There was a drawer on the right side of the kitchen shelf. She pulled it open. Inside, a pair of reading glasses with one lens cracked, 3 loose nails, a coil of picture wire, and a leather measuring tape. Old, the leather worn thin at the end where the 0 mark was. She turned it over. 2 letters stamped into the back of the case. H.V. Harwick Vance, her grandfather. She stood there holding it, turned it over again. The leather was soft in a specific way, soft from years of use, from hands working it open and close, from sliding it across rough wood and rough ground. He had measured everything in this place with this. Every wall he built, every corner he checked, every piece of this land he understood. She put it in her coat pocket. The light through the south window was already going low and orange. She had maybe 90 minutes before dark and hadn't eaten since the peanut butter crackers she'd finished on the drive up Route 7. She ate a tin of beans cold, standing at the window, watched the tree line go dark from the bottom up, the way it does in a hollow when the ridge blocks the last of the sun. Somewhere up on the slope a branch cracked, the clean, sharp crack of something with weight moving through dry timber. Not wind. She stayed still. The sound didn't repeat. She banked the fire low the way her father had shown her, once watching from a doorway when she was 8 or 9, not saying anything, just watching until she got it right enough to hold coals through the night without burning through the wood by morning. She spread the sleeping bag on the rope cot in the corner. The smell in the room was wood smoke and cold and something older underneath, something that had been in these walls a long time. She lay there listening to the mountains settle. She woke before light, not gradually, just awake, the way you get in a place that's new to you, where every small sound arrives without a frame of reference to soften it. Something was dripping. She lay still and mapped it. 2 drips in quick succession, then a pause, then 3 more hitting what sounded like the floorboards near the east wall. She reached out and felt the sleeping bag. Dry. She lay counting intervals until it made sense, rain or melt coming off the roof, working through the shingles. She noted it, did not get up, closed her eyes again. The second sound was different. Footsteps. Outside. Not fast, not sneaking, just the deliberate crunch of someone walking on ground that had a thin frost on it and not particularly caring who heard. She was up before she finished the thought. Boot, boot. knife on the belt, 4 steps to the door. She opened it. A man stood at the bottom of the 2-foot drop where a porch used to be, 70 or so, flannel shirt under a canvas chore coat, a faded blue wool cap that had been washed too many times. He was looking at the woodshed, not at her or pretending to. He had a cast iron pot in one hand and a stack of firewood tucked under the other arm that he hadn't carried, gently judging by the red in his hands. He set both things down on the step. Didn't knock, didn't announce anything. Just set them down the way you set things on a table you expect someone to find. Then he turned to go. "Who are you?" He stopped, turned back part way. His face had the particular kind of weathered stillness that comes from spending a lot of time outdoors and a lot of time keeping your own counsel. Cledwin Cass, I'm a neighbor. There are no neighbors for 4 miles. That's right. He looked at the pot. It's bean soup. Still warm if you eat it soon. Ruel looked at the pot, then at him. You knew this cabin. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer it like one either. I knew it. Did you know my grandfather? A pause. Not hesitation exactly. More like a man choosing his words the way you choose your footing on a steep slope, carefully and with full awareness of what's on either side. I knew him. Then tell me about him. Something shifted in his expression, not closed exactly, more like a door that was open a crack and he just decided to leave it at a crack. That, he said, isn't mine to tell. He turned and walked back to the truck idling at the head of the path, left her standing there in the cold with a pot of bean soup that was as promised still warm. She looked at the pot for a long time, picked it up, went inside. The soup was good, better than anything she'd eaten in 3 weeks. She sat at the small table by the east window and ate slowly and watched the morning light come up over the ridge line, amber first and then pale gold, and she thought about what Cledwin Cass had said, not mine to tell, which meant there was something to tell, which meant someone else was supposed to tell it, which meant Cledwin Cass had known her grandfather well enough to know who that someone was, but who, she didn't know. She'd never met anyone who'd known Harwick Vance. Her father had mentioned him only a few times, said he was a private man, said he'd lived alone up on that mountain for as long as anyone could remember and hadn't come down much in his last years, said there'd been a falling out a long time ago, the kind that becomes its own kind of silence after enough years pass. He'd never explained the falling out. Ruel had never asked. She'd been a child, and then she'd been a teenager, and then she'd been the person sitting across the desk from the attorney in the beige office, and asking had stopped being an option because there was no one left to ask. She thought about her mother once briefly, the woman who had left when Ruel was 4, whose face existed in exactly one photograph, and whose name she'd looked up online years ago and found nothing useful, gone in one direction, her father gone in another, and now here she was in a place that had belonged to a grandfather she'd never met, holding his measuring tape in her coat pocket like it was a compass. She washed the pot with a rag and the cold water from the hand pump, set it on the shelf, went back outside. The cedar. She needed to get on the roof by the end of the week, which meant she needed shingles, which meant she needed the right wood first. She walked the eastern slope below the cabin with a rag in her pocket, looking for a cedar with the right girth. Her grandfather had used eastern red cedar for the original shingles. She could tell by the grain and the smell where the wood was still exposed. Sharp, medicinal, something between camphor and rain. 3 trees within a quarter mile that might work. She marked them all with the rag. Then she went back to the cabin, put more wood on the fire, found the froe in the lean-to shed attached to the south wall, old tool blade stamped with a mark she couldn't fully read, 2 letters, and a date that might have been 1931. The handle had been replaced at some point with a piece of ash that someone had shaped by hand with a draw knife. You could still see the flat facets where the blade had tracked. She ran her thumb along the edge. Still good. The smallest of the 3 marked cedars went down in the late morning. The bow saw took longer than it should have. Her shoulders were not ready for it. She limbed it where it fell, blocked it into 18-inch rounds, started splitting with the froe and a wooden mallet she found hanging inside the shed door. The wood opened along the grain exactly the way cedar is supposed to, in long, pale slices, the smell coming up sharp and clean in the cold air. By mid-afternoon, she had 31 shingles. She needed 12. The rest she stacked in the shed, precisely, off the ground, away from the wall, the way the old woodpile inside had been stacked. She stood back and looked at her own stack for a moment, then nodded at nothing in particular and went to find the rope. Getting on the roof was the problem she'd been turning over for 2 days. The pitch was steep 9 and 12, and the north side dropped away through the timber with no good landing below. She found 40 feet of 3/8-inch manila rope coiled on a peg in the shed, still supple, no rot she could find. She tied one end around the base of the red oak that stood close enough to the ridge to be useful, threw the coil over and let the rope drape down the south face where the pitch was more forgiving, and the drop was only about 6 feet to flat ground. She spent 40 minutes on the roof. Her hands were cold through the work gloves by the time she found the 2 slipped shingles, cedar hand splits. The original work, she could see the marks of the froe in the wood, the same marks her own splits had, which meant Harwick had done this himself, probably from a cedar on this same slope, probably with the same froe she'd used this afternoon. The gap between the 2 slipped shingles was 3 fingers wide. Water had been tracking down the sheathing board underneath and finding the wall log for looking at the staining below at least 4 or 5 years. She fitted the new shingles, nailed them, checked the overlap, climbed back down the rope hand over hand, and stood on solid ground and looked up at the roof. It would hold. For now, it would hold. That night, she went back up the ladder to the loft. She'd been up once before, the day she arrived, checking the sheathing from below, confirming the damage she'd seen from the outside. She hadn't stayed long. The loft was low, maybe 5 feet at the peak, and she had to duck the ridge line and move carefully. It smelled of something dry and close, mouse sign and old cloth, a collapsed straw tick mattress at the far end, a wooden crate turned on its side, used as a shelf. She held her flashlight over each thing, a kerosene lantern with a cracked chimney, a pair of wool trousers folded over a nail in the rafter, a rusted tin cup, a folded piece of oilcloth, and then at the far end where the pitch of the roof came down to the floor, she saw the board, a single plank, sitting loose in the decking. She could see it from across the loft because the fit was slightly off, a hair's gap, where the surrounding boards sat flush to each other, but this one sat separate. She went to it slowly, crouched down, looked at the edges, old nail holes, 4 of them, but no nails. The nails had been pulled, not pried out, pulled cleanly, which meant someone had removed them on purpose and set the board back down without refastening it, left it to be found. She worked her fingers under the near edge and lifted. The cavity underneath was about 8 inches deep, the width of 2 joists, dry whatever moisture had gotten into the rest of the loft. Over the decades, had not reached this corner. Someone had chosen the location carefully. There were 3 things inside: a bundle of canvas, old waxed canvas, the kind with brass grommets along the edge, tied with a leather lace that had gone stiff and dark, a glass jar with a metal lid sealed with wax around the rim. Inside the jar, something dark and granular that caught the flashlight beam and held it, and beneath both of those, lying flat against the rough-cut subfloor, a notebook, composition style, black cover with a marbled gray pattern, corners soft with age. She took out the notebook first. She didn't know why. Instinct, maybe. The sense that whatever was inside the jar and inside the canvas bundle was the answer, and she wanted to understand the question first. The cover had no writing on it. She opened to the first page and held the flashlight close. The handwriting was small, careful, The letters formed with the deliberateness of someone who didn't write often, but took it seriously when they did. The ink had gone brown. At the top of the first page, a date, March 4th, 1947. Below it, one line. If you're reading this, you already know the place. Take care of it. That was all on the first page. She turned to the next. Dimensions. The cabin's dimensions hand-drawn with a straight edge and annotated in the margins. Where the spring ran, how deep the well went, and which month it usually went low. Where the soil was too thin for a garden on the upper slope, and where on the south side it wasn't. A note about the north wall. Check the sill log every spring. Water comes off the roof wrong there. A note about the stove damper. Sticks in cold weather. Pull and rotate, don't push up. Practical things, written by a man who expected someone to need them. She read until the flashlight started to dim. Outside, the wind had picked up working at the eaves. The stove below ticked and settled. The notebook had maybe 60 pages of writing, not consecutive. Some pages skipped, some with only a line or two, some dense with observations about weather and game movement and the behavior of the creek during hard rain. It wasn't a diary. It was closer to a manual for living in this specific place, written by someone who had learned it the way she was learning it. One winter at a time, one problem at a time. She set the notebook on the shelf beside her own small stack of things, put her hand on the canvas bundle, then lifted it off. It was heavier than cloth should be. She set it back down. Some things want to wait until morning light. The morning came in gray and slow, the light arriving at the east window like it wasn't sure it was welcome. She could see her breath. The stove had burned down to ash and the temperature inside had dropped to something that made the floorboards feel like stone through wool socks. She dressed standing in the sleeping bag, both layers of wool, the canvas coat, then climbed down and rebuilt the fire with cedar splits from the stack against the near wall. While the stove found its heat, she looked at the canvas bundle on the workbench where she put it the night before. She made coffee first. Hand crank grinder bolted to the wall beside the window. Dark roast from the feed store in town, boiled in the blue enamel pot until it smelled right. She sat at the table with the mug and looked at the bundle and let the stove do its work. The notebook was on the shelf. She pulled it down and found the page she'd stopped at. And then she found the next one. The handwriting changed here slightly larger, the letters less controlled, like it had been written in worse light or colder conditions. She read the first line once, read it again, found the surveyor's marks today, southeast corner of the parcel 30 yards past the big hemlock that was struck twice. The line doesn't run where the county says it runs. She set the mug down. Below it, only one more sentence on the page. The difference is about 4 acres, and what's on those 4 acres is why I never filed the correction. She sat with that for a long time. The stovepipe hummed one low note. A wind came off the ridge and ran along the roof above her. 4 acres, a property line that didn't match the county record. A reason kept quiet long enough that the man who knew it was 30 years gone. She looked at the canvas bundle. She looked back at the notebook. She turned the page. The next page held a sketch, not careful work, just quick lines, the kind a man makes to fix a thing in his memory before the light goes. A rough rectangle for the cabin, north marked with an arrow that tilted slightly west, a dotted line running southeast from a point labeled Big Hemlock, double struck angling through what the sketch called wet ground, and ending at a small circle. Beside it, a notation she had to hold, the page close to read stone, KC 3 courses mortared. The 4 acres were shaded with cross-hatching. Inside the cross-hatching, 3 symbols. One looked like a horizontal ladder, a vein maybe or a seam. The second was a simple square with a dot at the center. The third was just the letter S, circled twice. She didn't know what any of them meant, yet. But her grandfather had, and he'd left the map and the bundle and the jar, not hidden left. There was a difference. Hidden things are protected from everyone. Left things are protected until the right person comes. She looked at the leather measuring tape in her coat pocket, the HV stamped on the back. She took it out and set it on the table beside the notebook. He had measured everything with this, including, she was now certain, those 4 acres. She opened the canvas bundle. It was heavier than cloth for a reason. Inside 2 layers of wax canvas, wrapped tight, was a folded paper brittle at the creases, and underneath it, a small glass vial stopped with a waxed cork, holding something dark and granular that caught the morning light through the east window and held it, not reflected it, held it, the way certain minerals do when the light hits them at the right angle. She unfolded the paper first. A map, hand-drawn, the same compressed pencil as the notebook, but the paper had gone amber at the edges and the fold lines had nearly separated. She spread it flat on the table and weighted the corners with the vial, the lantern base, the coffee mug, and her thumb. The mountain. She recognized the ridgeline immediately. The creek he'd labeled in what looked like younger handwriting, less settled, closer to how a boy writes before he finds his own letters read, Casper Fork, which was what the county map called it too. The cabin was marked, a square with a dot inside it. From there, a line running northeast, maybe 300 yards, by her eye, guessing scale from the ridge line, ending at a symbol she had to hold the page close to read. 2 crossed lines, small circle at the center, a datum point, a fixed reference stake, and then off the datum, a second line, shorter, running due east, ending at a filled circle solid, black pressed hard into the paper. Below it, 4 words. Below the second stone. She sat back, picked up the vial, held it to the light. The dark granular material inside shifted when she tilted it. Dense, heavier than soil, with a flat metallic sheen when the light caught it straight on. She pulled the wax cork out carefully, tipped the smallest amount onto her palm, heavy for its size, color somewhere between dark rust and black. Individual grains irregular, angular, not rounded like river sand. Some held the light longer than others. She pressed one grain between her thumbnail and her fingertip. It didn't compress. It didn't smear. It held its shape, the way only one kind of material holds its shape. She poured it back into the vial, pressed the cork in. Outside, the fire had died down to coals. The wind was moving through the ridge timber in long, slow pulls. She sat with the map and the vial for a long time, and then she put on her second layer and her boots and her grandfather's coat. She put the vial in her breast pocket and buttoned the flap. She put the leather measuring tape in the other pocket, picked up the notebook, found the page with the sketch. The big hemlock, double struck, southeast corner, 30 yards past it, a stone marker, 3 courses of mortared stone, and below the second stone, whatever he'd buried there decades ago, she didn't know yet, but she was going to find out. Not because she knew what it was, because he had left it for whoever came, and she was whoever came. The morning light was coming through the east window properly now, not uncertain anymore, just present, gold and straight and cold, the kind of light that doesn't apologize for arriving. She went out into it. She found the hemlock before she found the light. The slope was still in shadow when she crossed the clearing below the cabin, the frost not yet off the ground, her boots leaving dark prints in the gray. The timber thickened past the woodshed, hemlock and oak and a scattering of white pine. She moved through it the way her father had taught her, not fast, not looking at her feet, eyes up and scanning, reading what was there. The hemlock she needed wasn't hard to find, because lightning doesn't strike politely. It leaves a mark. 2 marks in this case, a scar running down the north face and a second one lower where the tree had been hit again years later and somehow survived both times. The trunk had closed around the damage the way old things close around old wounds, still standing, still growing, just carrying its history in the bark. 30 yards southeast. She counted her steps, stopped at 28, looked down. Wet ground like the notebook said, soft enough that her boots sank a half-inch with each step. The kind of ground that stays wet even in a dry September because something underneath is keeping it fed. She moved carefully, another few yards, and then the terrain firmed up slightly, a low rise barely noticeable where two stones lay side by side in the leaf litter. Same size, same gray-green color, the kind of stones a creek makes common, the kind you'd step over without a thought. She stood there looking at them. One of them had been placed. She knew it the way you know a door has been painted recently, not because you see the brush strokes, but because everything is just slightly too even, too deliberate. The stone on the right sat at a fractional angle that wasn't how stones settle on their own. Somebody had picked it up and set it back down. The second stone, she put her flashlight on the ground and got on her knees. It moved when she worked her fingers under the edge. Heavier than it looked, she rocked it toward her, and it came free of the mud with a slow sucking sound, and she set it aside. Underneath was a clay depression, maybe 6 inches across, packed smooth around the edges, but the center was drier than it should have been. She pressed her fingers in, hit something solid at about 3 inches. She dug with her fingers, slowly. The soil came away in clean plugs, and then she had it a fold of oilcloth, bound tight wrapped with a strip of leather lacing, threaded through a small brass grommet that had turned green with age. She sat back on her heels and held it, heavy, cold from the ground, the size of a small book. The leather lace was rusted at the grommet, and she worked it loose with her grandfather's knife, careful not cutting until the knot gave. She unfolded the oilcloth layer by layer, 3 layers. Whoever had wrapped this had wrapped it like they expected it to wait a long time, inside a glass vial, larger than the one from the loft, filled to the waxed cork with the same dark angular material, and beneath the vial, folded once and still dry, a half-page of paper, in the same hand as the notebook. Same compressed pencil, but the letters leaned harder to the right here, written fast, written in low light maybe, or cold, or both. She unfolded it slowly, read it once, then again. If you found this, you are either kin or you earned it. Either way, it's yours now. Don't be in a hurry. The mountain doesn't reward hurry. That was all. No name, no date, no explanation. Just trust, extended to a person he'd never met, through decades of ground and cold, and 2 stones set side by side. Ruel sat on the bank of Casper Fork for a long time. The creek moved past her boots. The light was coming up behind the eastern ridge, now finally clearing the treetops, falling in long, cold pieces through the timber. She held the vial up to it. The material inside shifted, dark and angular and dense. It caught the light at a specific angle and held it, not like glass, not like metal, not like anything she had a name for yet. She didn't open it, not yet. Some things want to wait until you know what question you're asking. She put both vials in her chest pocket, buttoned the flap, picked up the leather measuring tape from where it had fallen when she knelt, put that in the other pocket, HV on the back of the case. She walked back up through the hemlock stand to the cabin and started thinking about the town. She needed Portland's cement. She needed it this week before the chimney cap got any worse. She needed dried beans, another bag, lantern fuel, and she needed, though she hadn't admitted it to herself until right now, standing in the clearing, looking at the cabin in the morning light, she needed to talk to someone who had known this place, not Cledwin Cast. He'd made it clear where his line was. Someone else. She drove the truck down the gravel road in second gear, both hands on the wheel, the cracked passenger window rattling in its packing tape frame. 11 miles to town. It felt longer going down than it had coming up. Everything does going down. You can see what's below you. The town was the kind of place that has one of everything and nothing twice. One diner, one hardware store, one gas station, one small grocery that also sold bait and had a hand-lettered sign in the window advertising deer processing through November. She parked in front of the grocery. The bell above the door announced her. The store smelled of aged wood and coffee and something faintly floral that she couldn't place. The man at the register nodded without looking up from whatever he was pricing. She found the cement bags in the back, the dried beans in the middle aisle, the lantern fuel on the bottom shelf by the door. She was setting everything on the counter when a voice from the end of the aisle said, "You're staying up at the Vance place." Not a question. Ruel turned. A woman, 76, maybe 78, short, gray hair cut practically not styled, the kind of haircut that means you've stopped having opinions about your hair. She had a canvas bag over one arm and a tin of coffee in the other hand, and she was looking at Ruel with the direct, unembarrassed attention of someone who has earned the right to look at people however she wants. "How did you know that?" "Small town." She set the coffee tin on the counter. "And Cledwin Cass talks more than he thinks he does." "Of course he does." Ruel almost said that out loud. Didn't. Instead, "Did you know my grandfather?" The woman looked at her for a long moment, the kind of moment that has weight in it. "Harwick Vance," she said. "Yes, I knew him." She put out her hand. "Dagna Furch." "Ruel." "I know." She picked up her coffee tin, set it back down, seemed to be deciding something. Then she said, "Walk with me a moment." They walked to the end of the aisle, which in a store this size meant maybe 12 feet, but 12 feet was enough. Dagna reached into the canvas bag, brought out a small key. Brass, the kind used on old lock boxes, tied to a strip of leather that had gone nearly black. She held it in her palm between them. "Harwick gave me this." Ruel looked at it, did not reach for it yet. "When, 1994, a few weeks before he passed." She paused. "He said when someone comes for the place, give them this. He said I would know." "Did you know?" "I knew the minute you walked in." She tilted her hand slightly. "I've been waiting 30 years to give this away." Ruel picked up the key, small, lighter than it looked. The leather was stiff under her fingers. "What does it open?" Dagna looked at her steadily. "I don't know. He didn't say." She stood in the parking lot with the key in her fist for a full minute after Dagna went back inside. 30 years. This woman had kept a key for 30 years without knowing what it opened, without asking, without losing it, without deciding one day that Harwick Vance was dead long enough that the obligation had expired. Just kept it, because she'd said she would. Ruel thought about that. Thought about the specific kind of person that requires, the specific kind of discipline, not dramatic discipline, the kind in movies where someone sacrifices everything in a single moment, the quiet kind, the get up every morning and still keep the key kind, the kind that doesn't make speeches. She got in the truck, sat there, the key in her palm. What locks fit a key this size? Not a door lock too small, not a padlock. The shape was wrong, more like a strongbox, the kind people used before banks were trusted, before banks existed, within reasonable distance of a mountain hollow in Carter County, Tennessee. She drove back up the gravel road with the key in her breast pocket next to the 2 vials. She did not go straight to the loft. She made herself do the work first, because the work was what the cabin needed, because the work was what Harwick had done day after day for 47 years, and the cabin was still standing because of it. She repointed the chimney cap with Portland cement, mixed stiff, standing on the roof, with the rope looped around her waist and the trowel in her hand. Came down, checked the northeast corner foundation logs. Again, the softness in the outer inch wasn't worse, but it wasn't better either. She would need to shore that up before the ground froze solid. She hauled 3 loads of wood from the felled cedar to the shed, stacked them right, off the ground, away from the wall, the way his woodpile inside was stacked, which she had not consciously decided to imitate, which she had done anyway. She ate sardines out of the tin at the table and read the notebook while the stove worked through a piece of split oak. The notebook was 60 pages of a man paying attention. Weather patterns, game trails, the exact month the spring ran strong, and the exact month it thinned. He'd noted the behavior of the creek during a hard rain in 1952, how the lower drainage backed up toward the root cellar when the snowmelt came off the north ridge too fast. He'd written dig the secondary channel wider before February. You'll be grateful in April. She underlined it with her thumbnail, not because she was sure she'd still be here in February, but because she was starting to think she might be. Near the back of the notebook, the handwriting changed again, not larger this time, smaller, more compressed, like a man trying to fit everything into the space he had left. She read slowly. The seam runs northeast to southwest, maybe 60 feet exposed at the surface where the slide took the hillside in 61. I showed the assay report to no one. I paid the surveyor in cash and told him the correction wasn't necessary. He understood. Men like him always understand when cash is involved and no questions are asked. She turned the page. What's in that ground isn't a fortune. I want to be clear about that. But it is enough. Enough that someone with a deed and a good attorney could make a case that would take years and cost more than I'd ever have. So I left the line where the county put it. 4 acres outside the parcel on paper. 4 acres that nobody else knows to look at. A blank line, full stop in the middle of the page. He'd never done that anywhere else in 60 pages. And then, if you're reading this, you came with the deed. That means I trusted you enough to leave it to you. The canvas and the jar will explain the rest. Ruel set the notebook down. She went up to the loft, found the key in her pocket, and held it alongside the bundle she'd left up there 2 days ago, the bundle with the brass grommet. She hadn't noticed it properly the first time, but now she saw it. A small ring, same size, same color as the key. The key went in, turned, the lace came free. Inside the folded map she'd already opened, and beside it, something she had not unwrapped yet, a second layer of oilcloth, tied differently than the first, sealed with the waxed lacing. She worked it open carefully. Inside that 3 things, a folded document, official looking, the kind with a notary seal, gone faint with age. A small envelope sealed her grandfather's handwriting on the outside. One word, whoever. And beneath both of those, wrapped in a final piece of soft cloth, a glass jar, same type as the vials but larger, filled with more of the same dark angular material, but at the bottom of the jar, visible, when she held it to the light, something else, not granular, solid, flat, maybe an inch across. A piece of something, cut not found, straight edges on 2 sides, irregular on the others, dark gray, almost black, with a surface that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it, and in one corner where the light caught it at the right angle, a deep metallic sheen, not gold, not silver, something between the two and neither. She stared at it for a long time, then she set the jar down and opened the envelope. My name is Harwick Vance. I have worked these 9 acres since March of 1947, when I was 22 years old and had nothing else and needed somewhere to be. She read slower. The way you read something when you understand it's the only copy. The spring runs clean in May and June. Do not trust it in August. Let it settle overnight and check the smell. The west window sticks in damp weather. Pull down, not up. The north sill log needs checking every spring. I should have fixed what's wrong there years ago, and I did not, and that's on me, and I'm sorry for it. She thought about the water stain on the north wall, the one with 4 rings in it, 4 seasons of the same failure. He had known. What is in the jars and what is in the ground on the southeast side, I did not touch it. Not because I did not know what it was worth. I knew. I had it tested in 62 and I knew exactly. I did not touch it because some things are not meant to be used up in one lifetime. Some things are meant to be held for whoever comes next and needs it more than you do. A gap on the page. like he stopped and restarted. I started this book in 1947 when I first came here. I added this last page in 1981, the year I finally understood what this place was for. It took me 34 years. I hope it takes you less. Another gap. If you found this, you came here for a reason. Maybe you needed a place to be. Maybe someone told you there was nothing worth keeping here. Don't listen to them. They are telling you about themselves, not about this land. The mountain does not reward hurry, but it rewards showing up. I hope you stay. HV, March 14th, 1981. Ruel held the page, looked at the date. March 14th, 1981, the same date carved into the loft beam. She had found it the first night the name Vance cut deep into the wood, and below it that date. He'd sat up here and written this, then climbed down and taken a knife to the beam and cut the name of his family into it. Same day, same act, different materials. She was 24 years from being born when he did this. He didn't know she existed, couldn't have. Her father had barely been a teenager, and still, he had written whoever on the envelope. Not a name, not a relationship, just whoever was meant to find this find it. Whoever showed up when everything else was gone, showed up. She looked at the date one more time, put the letter down very carefully on the floorboard, and said out loud to the empty loft, to the cold air, to the HV carved into the beam 3 feet from her head, I found it. Not loudly, not dramatically, just said it. The way you say something to someone who isn't in the room anymore, but might still be listening. The wind moved through the eaves. The stove below ticked once and went quiet. She came back down the ladder and sat at the table for a long time without doing anything, which was unusual for her. She was not a person who sat without doing anything. Sitting without doing anything felt to Ruel Vance approximately like standing in the middle of a road. Technically possible, not a state you wanted to maintain, but she sat because she needed to think, and she needed to think correctly, and she needed to not do the thing she always did, which was take the next obvious step before she'd fully understood what the previous step had shown her. The mountain doesn't reward hurry. Okay, fine. She'd heard him. What did she know? She knew there was a geological feature on the southeast corner of the property, exposed by a landslide in 1961. Her grandfather had had it tested, and the results were significant enough that he'd paid a surveyor to keep quiet about the property line discrepancy. Significant enough that he'd left samples behind with a map and a letter and a key held by a woman in town for 30 years. She knew the property line on the county records didn't include 4 acres that actually belonged to the parcel. Her grandfather had known this and deliberately not filed the correction. She knew she did not yet have a clean water source, a sufficient woodpile, or a repaired foundation corner. She knew she had 9 days of food and $47, well, $34 now after the hardware store. She knew that whatever was in those jars was the reason her grandfather had stayed on this mountain for 47 years and refused every offer and kept every secret. The official-looking document from the bundle. She'd almost missed it in the weight of the letter. She unfolded it now on the table. A hand-drawn survey, dated 1962, signed by someone with initials RTK and a notary seal from Carter County. The property lines drawn in careful ink and then in pencil added separately a second set of lines extending the southeast corner, with annotations in her grandfather's handwriting. True line confirmed by marker stone, 3-course mortar set, 1961. Difference 4.2 acres. Formation designation not entered in county record per owner request. She stared at the last line. Per owner request. He hadn't just stayed quiet. He'd asked them to stay quiet. He'd made the choice deliberately, fully knowing what he was sitting on and deciding that staying on it was worth more than whatever it might bring. Some things are not meant to be used up in one lifetime. 3 days passed. She worked. That was what there was to do, And so she did it. The foundation corner got shored with new framing. She cut from a dry oak deadfall she found on the lower slope, not a permanent fix, but enough to get through the first winter. The floor in the main room she walked plank by plank, pulling the compromised surface boards and replacing them where she could with lumber she found stacked in the woodshed under a tarp, already milled, already dry, waiting. Who had milled them when she didn't know, just found them there and used them? She tested the creek, left a bucket of Casper fork water to settle overnight, checked it in the morning, clear at the top, a faint ring of something at the bottom sediment. Not chemical, she thought, but she didn't know enough to be sure. She needed a proper test. She boiled all her water. The notary document and the survey she folded back carefully and put with the notebook in the cavity under the loft floorboard. She put the board back, did not nail it, left it the way he had left it. She kept the vials on the kitchen shelf where she could see them. On the fourth morning after finding the loft, she woke before 5 and lay in the dark, listening to the mountain, and thought somebody else knows. Not Cledwin. He'd known Harwick, but he'd said the story wasn't his to tell, which meant he knew there was a story, not necessarily the specifics. Not Dagna. Dagna had kept a key for 30 years without knowing what it opened, which meant Harwick had kept the details from her too, on purpose. So who knew? She lay still and worked backward. The attorney in Elizabethton. He'd called the cabin a burden, recommended she sign the release form, seemed very prepared for her to do so, which was normal. He was a man whose job was tying up loose ends, and this was a loose end. Except he had known about the back taxes. He had known about the county's interest in the property. He had been very specific about the timeline in a way that felt rehearsed, like a man who had already thought through where this conversation was going. She hadn't registered that at the time. She'd been too tired and too focused on not crying in a stranger's office. She registered it now, and then there was the morning the truck came. She heard it before she saw it. Not Cledwin's old pickup. She knew that engine by now, knew the particular rattle it made over the last quarter mile of gravel. This was something newer, smoother, the sound of a vehicle that costs money and is expected to make none. She was splitting wood in the side yard when it appeared at the tree line. A silver SUV, clean, Carter County mud on the wheel wells, which meant it had come up the full gravel road, not just the paved section. A man got out. 49 maybe. Pressed shirt with a subtle check pattern, the kind of clothes that are designed to look casual and don't quite succeed. He walked toward her with his hands visible. Consciously, she noticed the body language of someone trained to approach cautious people. He smiled, extended a hand. Ms. Vance, my name is Lachlan Meyer. I'm with Greystone Resources. She did not put down the splitting maul, not aggressively, just set it against her leg, where she could feel it. I don't know what that is. We're a mineral exploration company. We work throughout the Appalachian region. He had a card ready. The card appeared in his fingers the way cards do when someone has practiced the motion. We've been monitoring property transactions in this area, and I wanted to introduce myself. Property transactions. She took the card, looked at it, looked at him. The property hasn't transacted yet. The estate is still in process. Something moved through his expression, quick, gone before it fully formed. Of course, I meant property changes in the area generally. We like to establish relationships early. Early. How did you know my name? Ah, the county records office. As the named heir in the estate filing, your name appears. The estate filing is sealed until probate clears. A pause, not long. A professional pause, not a flustered one. The kind of pause that means this person is smarter than I expected and I need to recalibrate. I may be thinking of a different document. He smiled again, warmer this time. In any case, I just wanted to let you know we'd love to discuss the property when you're ready. No pressure. We work at whatever pace suits the landowner. She looked at him for a long moment. I'll keep that in mind. She didn't say goodbye, didn't see him out, just turned back to the wood and picked up the maul and split the next piece down the center. Clean. One stroke. She heard the SUV start up and ease back down the gravel road. She did not watch it go. That evening she went to find Cledwin, 4 miles south on the same gravel road, then a half-mile down a dirt track she nearly missed. Small farm. The house sat low against a hillside, practical, not proud. A dog on the porch that barked once and then decided she was acceptable. Smoke from the chimney going straight up in the still cold air. She knocked. He opened the door with a dish towel in his hand and looked at her without surprise. I figured you'd come down sooner or later. Lachlan Meyer. The name did something to Cledwin's face. Not much, but enough. Come in. She came in. The kitchen was warm and smelled of wood smoke and something cooking. He poured coffee she hadn't asked for and set it in front of her and sat across the table and looked at his own cup for a moment. He wasn't the first. What? Greystone, or whoever they were before Greystone. He turned his cup. 1997, the first one came. Different name. Same company, different name. They hired a surveyor to walk the property line. Ruel's hands went flat on the table. She noticed this, made herself pick up the coffee. Harwick's property. The whole hollow. They were walking everyone's lines. Bought 2 properties to the east, legitimate good price. Then they got to your grandfather's line. And the surveyor found the discrepancy, the 4 acres. He said it like she already knew, because he'd figured she did. He didn't tell Harwick, told them instead. So they knew. Have known since 97. They've been waiting. Why didn't they just file a claim, challenge the line? Because Harwick was alive, and Harwick would fight them until he couldn't, and then he'd die fighting. And a dead man fighting is more expensive than a live man waiting. He looked at her. So they waited. For him to die. For the property to pass to someone who didn't know what they had. He was quiet for a moment. I told Harwick in 98 that they'd been walking the line, that the surveyor had talked. What did he say? Cledwin almost smiled. Not quite. He said let them want. There's nothing to take when the owner's still standing on it. The fire in Cledwin's stove made a small sound, settled. The dog outside said something brief to a passing owl and went quiet. He knew this would happen. Ruel said it slowly, working it out as she said it. After he was gone, he knew someone would come. He prepared for it. He prepared for you, though he didn't know it was you specifically. He didn't know I existed. No. Cledwin looked at her steadily. But he knew what kind of person would find those vials and read that notebook and not run. And he built a case for that person. Long before they were born, she drove back up the mountain in the dark. No radio, just the gravel under the tires and the tree line on either side and the headlights showing her 100 feet of road at a time, which was all she'd ever had, really. 100 feet. You deal with what's in the light and you trust that the next 100 feet will show up when you get there. She had the vials, she had the survey, she had the letter and the notebook and the map. She had a property line that didn't match the county record by 4 acres, and now she knew that someone else also knew. This had known it for 27 years and had been waiting for the property to pass to someone who didn't. Well, here she was. The cabin was dark when she pulled up. She sat in the truck for a moment, looked at it. 2 windows facing east, dark now. The new shingles on the southeast corner of the roof. She'd cut herself from a cedar on this slope. The chimney cap remortared and set right. The door she'd shouldered open the first day, now closing cleanly behind her when she left each morning, the swollen wood having dried in the heat from the stove. She'd done that, all of it. Not because she'd known what she was doing when she started, because she'd started anyway. She got out of the truck and went inside, rebuilt the fire, set a pot of water to boil, took both vials off the shelf and set them on the table under the lamp. She opened the notebook to the survey sketch page, looked at it for a long time. Then she got out a clean sheet of paper and began writing down everything she knew. Property line discrepancy, 4.2 acres, confirmed by 1962 notarized survey, not entered in county record at owner request. Geological feature vein running northeast to southwest, exposed 1961, tested 1962, results significant enough to justify concealment. Vials 2 samples retrieved, unknown material, dark, dense, angular, non-compressible, specific metallic sheen under direct light. Greystone Resources aware of discrepancy since 1997, currently circling. Lachlan Meyer advance team. She stopped writing, looked at the vials again. She needed to know what was in them, not because she was going to do anything dramatic about it, but because she could not make a single intelligent decision about the property, about Meyer, about any of it, without knowing what she was actually dealing with. She thought about the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Applied Geology Department. She'd looked it up once a year ago when she'd been thinking about college in the abstract way you think about things that require money you don't have. She could send a sample, small amount, anonymous, a P.O. box in town. Dagna, she thought Dagna would let her use the store address if she asked. The kind of person who holds a key for 30 years is the kind of person you can ask for the use of a mailing address. She wrote at the bottom of her list, send sample UT Knoxville, Applied Geology, small amount. Return address Furch's Grocery care of. Then she added one more line, don't be in a hurry. She looked at that line for a moment, picked up the pencil, underlined it, twice, the way he had. Outside, the wind was moving through the ridge timber in long, slow pulls. Inside, the fire had settled into its working rhythm, that low, steady heat that means the wood is good and the draw is right and you've done something correctly. The cabin was warm. For the first time since she'd shouldered the door open, in the cold, the cabin was actually warm. She didn't remark on it, didn't make it into something, just noted it the way her grandfather had noted things in his notebook. A fact, a thing that was true. She wrote it down. October, stove working, cabin warm. Then she closed both notebooks and put out the lamp. The envelope from the University of Tennessee came on a Wednesday. She almost missed it. She'd been going into town every few days, not for the mail specifically, just for whatever the day required. Cement, nails, a replacement bolt for the wood stove door that had started working loose. She collected her mail from the P.O. box at the end of those errands, the way you do something that might matter or might not, and you don't want to make too big a thing of it, either way. The envelope was thin, academic letterhead, return address, Department of Applied Geology, University of Tennessee, Knoxville. She stood at the P.O. box and looked at it for a moment. Then she drove back up the mountain, 11 miles, parked, went inside, built the fire up, made coffee, set the envelope on the table, and looked at it while the water boiled, opened it, one page, typed, professional but not cold, the kind of letter a researcher writes when they found something genuinely interesting and are trying not to show it too plainly. She read it twice. Then she set it down and picked up the first vial from the shelf, held it to the window. The afternoon light was coming through at the low October angle that makes everything look like it's been dipped in amber. The material inside shifted slightly, dark gray, almost black at the center, with that same flat metallic sheen at certain angles. The letter called it sphalerite, zinc sulfide ore, with significant silver co-occurrence at concentrations notable for academic documentation. Not a commercial deposit as represented, the letter was careful to say academic analysis only, not a resource assessment, but the geological fingerprint was clear, distinctive, indicative of a vein system consistent with known mineralization patterns in the Blue Ridge Formation, and then one more sentence at the bottom. The sample appears to originate from a surface exposed portion of a vein system. If a primary deposit exists at depth, assessment would require subsurface exploration. The exposed section alone, based on sample composition, suggests a formation of potential commercial interest. She put the letter down, looked at the vials. Potential commercial interests, which meant Greystone already knew, had known for 27 years, and had been waiting patiently with the particular patience of an organization that thinks in terms of decades for the moment when the person standing on the land didn't know what they were standing on, except here she was, standing on it, knowing exactly what it was. The letter from Greystone's lawyers arrived 4 days later. It came to the attorney's office in Elizabethton, the attorney who had told her to sign the release form in the beige office that smelled like printer toner. He forwarded it to her with a brief handwritten note that said you should probably respond to this, which was, she thought, perhaps the most useful thing he'd said to her since they'd met. She read it at the table, twice, then a third time, because legal language is designed to make you read it 3 times and still not be sure. Greystone Resources, LLC, represented by a firm out of Nashville, 4 pages, formal, polite in the specific way of documents that are about to be impolite. The substance, they were challenging the validity of the estate transfer on the grounds that the probate filing was incomplete, specifically that the asset listing failed to properly account for mineral rights associated with the property. They were careful to say challenging her right to the surface property, just the mineral rights, just the question of whether those rights had been properly established in the original deed. And, buried in page 3 in language so careful it almost disappeared, a reference to the property line discrepancy, not described as a discrepancy, described as a potential boundary ambiguity affecting approximately 4.2 acres on the southeast corner of the described parcel. They knew the exact acreage, 4.2 acres, the same number in the notarized survey from 1962 that was currently sitting in a sealed glass jar under the loft floor. She put the letter down and stared at the wall for a moment, the wall her grandfather had built. The logs chinked with a mixture she could still smell faintly on cold mornings, lime and sand, the original mortar holding after 77 years. Okay, so that was how they were going to do it. Not buy, challenge, find the seam in the ownership and put a wedge in it and wait for it to crack. They'd looked at the probate filing, found the gaps, because there were gaps, of course, there were gaps. A 19-year-old with $47 does not have a clean estate filing, and decided this was cheaper than negotiating. She picked up the letter again. Read the sentence about the boundary ambiguity one more time, and then she started laughing. Not the good kind of laughing, not the kind that means something is funny, the kind that comes out when you finally understood the shape of the thing you're dealing with, and it's both worse and simpler than you thought, because they had just handed her the argument, the thing they were using against her, the boundary discrepancy. The 4.2 acres outside the recorded parcel was also the thing that would prove the vein formation was on her land, not on unregistered property, not on county land, hers. If the true boundary ran where her grandfather's 1962 survey said it ran, and it did. She had the notarized document, she had the map, she had the physical marker stone, then the 4 acres with the exposed vein were inside her parcel. They were arguing about a line. So was she, except they thought they knew where the line was. She knew where the line actually was. She had it in writing, signed, sealed by a county notary in 1962. She stopped laughing, sat very still for a moment, then she picked up her pen and started writing. Dagna answered on the second ring. It's Ruel. I know. A brief pause, the sound of something being set down on a counter. What do you need? A lawyer. not the one in Elizabethton. No, a beat. Not him. Another pause, shorter, the kind that means a decision being made. I know a man, Robert Tully. He's been in the county 30 years. He knew your grandfather not well, but enough. He's honest, and he's not expensive, and he'll see you this week if I call. Can you call? I'll call now. That was it. No questions, no commentary, no, you poor thing, or I can't believe they'd do that, or are you sure you want to fight this? Just, I'll call now. Ruelle held the phone for a moment after the call ended. The specific kind of person she thought again. Robert Tully had an office above the hardware store in a building that leaned slightly to the left and had been leaning slightly to the left for probably 40 years and had decided that was fine. He was 63, corduroy jacket, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a desk covered in the specific organized chaos of a man who knows exactly where everything is and wouldn't be able to explain his system to anyone. He read the Greystone letter first, without expression, turned pages with the deliberate pace of a man who bills by the hour and does not rush. Then Ruelle set the other documents on his desk, the 1962 notarized survey, the notebook open to the page with the sketch and the annotations, the letter from UT Knoxville, and the 2 vials. He looked at the vials for a moment. May I? She nodded. He picked one up, held it to the window, set it back down carefully, then read the UT letter. A long silence. Your grandfather had this tested in 62. Yes. And kept it quiet. Yes. And left documentation for whoever came after him. He looked at her over the reading glasses. And the documentation includes a notarized survey that contradicts the county record. Yes. He was quiet for another moment. The Greystone letter is a pressure move, he said finally. They're not confident they can win in court. If they were confident, they wouldn't have written 4 pages of very polite language. They'd have filed. What they're hoping is that you'll look at this. He tapped the letter and decide it's too complicated, and they'll make you a fair offer, and you'll take it because you're 19 and you're tired and you haven't got money for a fight. She looked at him. I'm not tired. I can see that. He picked up the 1962 survey again. This document is the key. If it holds, and I believe it will hold, a notarized survey from a licensed county surveyor is not nothing, then the 4 acres are inside your parcel, which means the mineral rights are inside your parcel, which means Greystone's entire argument rests on a boundary ambiguity that you can resolve. Can I resolve it? You already have. Your grandfather resolved it in 1962. He just chose not to file the correction. He put the survey down, which was his right, and it's your right to file it now. She said, how long will it take? He said, 60 days for the estate transfer to complete if we move efficiently. The boundary correction we file simultaneously, it creates a parallel record that complicates any legal challenge Greystone might mount. By the time their lawyers have analyzed both filings, the math will tell them this isn't worth pursuing. You're sure? He looked at her steadily. In 30 years of practice in this county, I have never told a client I was sure of anything. But I am telling you, the math is not in their favor. A pause. They've been waiting for someone who didn't know what they had. The waiting is over. 3 weeks passed. She worked. She always worked. The work was the thing that held the days together and gave them their shape. She dug the secondary drainage channel on the north slope, the one her grandfather had noted in the notebook, the one that would prevent the root cellar from flooding in a hard spring. She dug it wider than he'd suggested, better too wide than not wide enough. She winterized the windows, found a cache of old rope caulk in the shed, still pliable, and pressed it into every gap she could find. The east windows she reglazed with the small bottle of linseed glazing compound she'd picked up in town. The west window that stuck in damp weather, she learned the trick. Down, not up, exactly as he'd written. She put up shelving in the root cellar using the milled lumber from the shed. She got the woodpile to a level that felt for the first time like enough. Not exactly enough, more than enough. The kind of more than enough that means you're not counting anymore. Cledwin came by twice, not with explanations, just with firewood, the first time a bag of dried corn the second. He never stayed long. He checked the chimney cap with his eyes before he left, the way someone checks something they helped fix, and nod once if it looked right, and that was his approval, and she understood it. She did not think about Greystone every day. Some days she didn't think about it at all. The mountain had a way of filling up the parts of your mind that wanted to spiral with the specific requirements of the day, the specific weight of the work, the specific cold of the air, and the specific color of the light at 4 in the afternoon when it came through the east windows at a low angle and made everything look like the inside of a lantern. She thought he lived like this for 47 years. She understood now why he hadn't left. The response from Greystone's lawyers came on the 38th day after Robert Tully filed the boundary correction and completed the estate transfer. 4 sentences. Greystone Resources, LLC, had reviewed the newly filed documentation regarding the described parcel. After consultation with their legal team, they had determined that further proceedings in the matter were not in the company's current interests. They wished the new property owner well. They withdrew their challenge with prejudice. She read it twice, put it down, picked up the vials from the shelf, held one in each hand, felt the weight of them, the specific density of something that had waited a long time to be understood. She didn't open them. There was no reason to open them. She already knew what was inside. She set them back on the shelf, not triumphantly, not like someone who had won, just set them back where they lived and went outside. November had arrived while she wasn't looking. The kind of November that comes to Carter County at 4,200 feet, like it owns the place, which it does. It absolutely does, and you'd be foolish to argue with it. The deciduous trees had let go of the last of their color. The slopes were gray and brown, and the hemlock stands were the only green left dark and steady against the pale sky. The creek was running louder. She could hear it from the clearing now. She stood in the yard and looked at the cabin. The roof held. The new shingles she'd cut from the cedar on this slope, her hands had done that with the froe that still had the maker's mark from 1931, with the rope she'd found on the peg in the shed on a roof at 912 pitch, with the north side dropping away into timber below. The chimney cap sat flat and even repointed and solid. The foundation logs were shored. The floor didn't give anymore. The door closed cleanly. She had done all of that. Not because she'd known how, because she'd started anyway and learned while she did it, because that was the only way anything got done. In the end, you start and you keep going, and the knowledge shows up when you need it. She thought about her grandfather standing in this same yard at 22 years old, nothing else, needed somewhere to be. She understood that completely. Cledwin came the second week of November. She heard the truck and was already at the door when he pulled in. He got out slowly the way he always did, like he was checking the ground before he committed to it, which was, she had come to understand just how he moved through the world. Carefully, on purpose. He had a covered dish, cast iron. She could smell it from the doorway. She stepped back to let him in. He set the dish on the stove without being told where to put it, looked around the room, not quickly with the specific, unhurried attention of someone cataloging changes. The floor, the shelving, the new glazing on the west window, the stove burning right. He sat down at the table. She poured coffee. They sat for a moment without talking, which was not uncomfortable. It was the particular comfort of two people who have both spent enough time in their own company to understand that words are optional. He said Greystone withdrew. Word travels. Tully told Dagna. Dagna told everyone. He looked at his cup. How do you feel? She thought about that honestly. The same, she said. I feel about the same. He nodded like that was the right answer. Harwick would feel the same, he said. He never got worked up about them, just stayed. That was his whole strategy. Just stay. She looked at the shelf, the 2 vials catching the light. He didn't just stay, she said. He prepared. Yes. He left a survey, a notarized document, 2 samples, a map, a letter. She paused. He left everything someone would need to hold this land after he was gone. He did all of that without knowing who was coming. Cledwin was quiet for a moment. He said to me once, this was maybe 93, 94. Toward the end, he said, the right person will come. I don't know who they are. I don't know when, but they'll come because this kind of place pulls the right people toward it, and there's nothing they can do about it. She looked at him. He wasn't talking about the minerals. No, Cledwin said. He wasn't. Outside, the wind moved through the ridge timber, long, slow, the particular sound November makes in the hemlocks, not sharp, not harsh, just present, the sound of something settling into what it is. She looked at the table. He didn't know me, she said. No, a pause. But he knew what he was hoping for, and you're it. She didn't answer that, because there was no answer for it, not a verbal one. Some things land in you, and you just sit with them and let them find their level. The cast iron pot on the stove smelled of something slow-cooked and good. The fire behind the stove door was doing its work. The November light was going the color of old brass through the east windows. She thought about her father, teaching her to read a hillside at 8 years old, standing in a field somewhere. She couldn't quite remember anymore, not saying anything until she got it right, just waiting, patient in the specific way of someone who knows the thing will come if you give it time. She thought about her mother gone when Ruel was 4, a face in one photograph, a name that returned nothing useful when she'd searched it years ago, gone in one direction, her father gone in another, and Harwick Vance alone on this mountain for 47 years, paying attention to everything and writing it all down for someone he would never meet, all of them gone in the various ways people go. And here she was, 19, sitting in a cabin that should have been taken by the county, with coffee and a cast iron pot and the legal right on paper to be exactly where she was. She said, "What did he grow in the south garden?" Cledwin looked at her. "On the south side. The ground's right for it." She looked at the window. "I want to plant in the spring. I need to know what does well up here." And something happened to Cledwin Cass's face then. Not the almost smile she'd seen before. An actual one. Quiet, fast. The kind that means a person has just been given something they didn't know they were waiting for. "Kale," he said, "does well in the cold. Beans, pole beans, not bush. Potatoes if you plant them early enough and hill them right." He paused. "He grew ramps too, but those aren't planted. Those just show up if the conditions are right." "And are they right here?" "They were once, might be again." He looked at her steadily. "You planning on being here in spring?" She looked back. "I'm planning on being here in February," she said, "so I can dig the drainage channel wider before the snow melt comes." He picked up his coffee cup, drank. Spring came the way spring comes at 4,200 feet, which is late and slow and with no apology for either. The snow that fell in January melted in March and refroze in early April, and finally around the 3rd week of April, the south-facing ground began to open up in the afternoons. She could see it happening, the way the soil softens incrementally, and then one day is just ready. She put the first seeds in on a Thursday. Pole beans, 2 rows of potatoes hilled up the way Cledwin had told her. She'd ordered the seed packets from a catalog she found on the shelf in the root cellar, her grandfather's catalog from 1988, wildly out of date, but useful for variety names. She'd looked up at the library in town. She worked with the leather measuring tape in her pocket, not because she needed it for the garden. It wasn't a gardening tool. She just kept it there. The way you keep certain things close, not because they're useful, but because they're grounding. a weight in the pocket that means something. That evening, she sat at the table with both notebooks open in front of her, her grandfather's, and her own, the battered notepad she'd started on, the first week the one with roof tarp nails, this week written in the margin of the edible plants field guide. She'd transferred it to a proper notebook somewhere in October. It looked different from his. Her handwriting was bigger, less controlled, but the shape of it was the same as his in one way, all fact, no sentiment, what was true, what needed doing, what she'd learned. She opened his to the last page. Read the letter one more time, not because she needed to. She had it more or less memorized by now, but because reading it still did something, still hit the same specific place inside her chest that nothing else quite reached. If you found this, you came here for a reason. Maybe you needed a place to be. She had needed a place to be. That was it. That was the whole thing. She had needed a place to stand, and there had been this place prepared and waiting, held together by a man she'd never met, who had trusted that the right person would find it, and she had found it. Not because she was special, not because she was destined, because she hadn't signed the paper. That was the only thing that had separated her from a county tax auction. She hadn't signed. She'd driven up the gravel road. She'd put her shoulder into a door that didn't want to open. That was all it took. That one refusal, that one choice. She thought about the people who had held this together from the outside. Dagna keeping a key for 30 years in a town 11 miles down the mountain, who had not been asked to do that dramatically, who had been asked quietly by a man leaving his affairs in order and had said yes and had kept saying yes every single day for 30 years without making a story of it. She thought about what that kind of quiet yes costs, and how rarely it gets acknowledged, and how the whole world really runs on that kind of yes, on the people who keep the key and don't ask why, and don't lose it, and don't decide after enough years that the obligation has expired. She picked up her own notebook, wrote at the bottom of the last page of notes April, ground open, seeds in, south garden, kale beans, potatoes. The drainage channel worked. Grateful in April. He was right. Then below that, something she hadn't planned to write until she was writing it, whoever comes after me, check the north sill log every spring. Water comes off the roof wrong there. I should fix it properly. Haven't yet. She stopped, read that back, and then slowly, a little surprised at herself, she smiled because she was already doing it. Without deciding to, without making a declaration, she was already writing the next version of the notebook, already thinking about whoever came after her the way he had thought about whoever came after him, already preparing, already trusting. The fire in the stove made a small sound, settled. Outside, the spring night was cold and clear and full of the particular sounds a mountain makes when it's deciding to become a different season. The creek running, the timber shifting, the owls doing their work in the hemlock stand. She put down the pen, looked around the room. New shingles on the roof she'd cut herself from a tree on this slope. Foundation shored, floor solid, chimney drawing clean, wood stacked right, drainage dug wide, seeds in the ground, name on the deed. She had arrived here with $47 and a sleeping bag that cost $6 at Goodwill, and a grandfather she'd never met who had somehow prepared this place for her before she was born. And she had stayed. She had showed up and she had stayed, and the mountain had done what the mountain does for the people who stay. It had given back. Not everything, not a fortune, not a resolution to every hard thing in her life. Her father was still gone. The $47 was still the sum total of what she'd had. The world outside this hollow was still exactly as complicated as it had been, but she had a place to stand. She had ground under her feet that she understood, that she had learned the way he had learned it one season at a time. She had a stove that worked, and a roof that held, and a south garden that would produce something in July if she was attentive and willing to keep learning what attentive meant at 4,200 feet in Carter County, Tennessee. She had enough. She had exactly enough. She was 19 years old. She had spent $47 on a cabin everyone else had written off. It was the best $47 she had ever spent.